Hello there, kia ora. It's been another strange week in terms of what's happened around the country and in politics. It started off with the United Nations Secretary General coming over and then saying things about oil and gas exploration here that the Prime Minister refuses to even acknowledge was being spoken about him. And it ended up with a whole bunch of leaks, some intellectual dishonesty, some admin errors. It was a very strange week. So you can check it all out in the Omnibus. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and tell everybody about it. Until afterwards, I will catch you later. Hello there, kia ora. This weekend, the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres stopped by in Auckland on his way to the Pacific Island Leaders Forum. While here, he met with the Prime Minister and Foreign Minister and praised how the country is moving towards a more environmentally friendly future, which, as former Prime Minister Helen Clark pointed out, means he probably wasn't briefed on this government's actions. In a following press conference, Guterres was asked about this government's plan to bring back oil and gas exploration, which he said was pointless, because in the 16 years between exploration starting and getting any results, the majority of the world will have moved on to alternative energy sources. On top of that, this weekend saw contaminants from a disused mine turn waterways orange, a risk that comes with mining, which is also something that this government is keen on and is pretty much determined to revive at any cost. So much so that mining companies are literally lining up to get behind the fast track approvals bill, meaning the risk of future incidents like this is increasing. We've also seen this government tank the sale of electric cars with the removal of the clean car discount. We saw the first increase in over a decade of carbon emissions from the country in the first quarter of the year due to policy changes this government made. In fact, the changes are so wide sweeping, well, we'll no longer reach our international obligations to bring emissions down by the end of the decade. This government also removed climate change and environmental portfolios from the cabinet table, showing just how much they give a shit about it. They scrapped the Initiative for Climate Action for Māori, the Emissions Reduction Plan. They scrapped initiatives for better public transport options while forging ahead with plans for more roads. They cut funding to the Climate Change Commission, native forest planting programs, community-based renewable energy plans, circular economy building around recycled products, environmental monitoring specialists. They removed the Natural and Built Environments Act that was part of the RMA reform plan. They rolled back insulation standards in homes, which increases the amount of energy and carbon produced to keep people warm and healthy. They rolled back freshwater protection policies. They cut over 300 jobs at the Ministry of the Environment and reduced biosecurity monitoring. Hell, part of their plan to reduce emissions from farming, which is our single largest emissions creator, is based on technology that hasn't been invented yet. One of the reasons Guterres is heading to the forum in Tonga is because he feels the islands are the most hard hit by climate change and the ones that do the least to cause it. As a leading voice in the Pacific, as the home to the largest Pacifica population in the world, and as a country that's been seen as a leader in this field, it's important to so many that we lead the way to a more sustainable future. Instead, the Prime Minister will be there grinning in a Hawaiian shirt for a photo op while talking about being a world leader in the field, while actively doing everything he can to make sure that nothing ever grows in that field again. Hello there, kia ora. Monday was a fascinating day for highlighting how much influence the world of politicians can have on influencing how our media operate and some of the very different levers that they can use to do so. From a media theorist perspective, there were actually a couple of different things that happened to showcase this. The first was a report from RNZ about Casey Costello releasing redacted information under the OIA. Back in December, Costello gave health officials a document calling Labour's smoke-free laws nanny state nonsense. Not like the nanny state nonsense of making beneficiaries have a payment card that has half their benefit put on and a list of where they can shop. No, it's a very different sort of nanny state, apparently. It's really hard to keep track. Anyway, Costello denied the document existed at the time to both media and written questions from Labour's health spokesperson, Dr. Aisha Viral. But now she released a redacted version of it under the OIA and claimed she has no idea who wrote it. The chief ombudsman was called in and said Costello had acted contrary to law, so she had to release it, and is still claiming she doesn't know who wrote it, only that they didn't work in her office. It's kind of weird. A whole bunch of things she didn't know just mysteriously happening for a former police detective. Now, this is where the media practice gets interesting. You see, our media has a code of compliance in place that means that they can only report on facts that are verifiable. With only a redacted version to use, that's all RNZ could report on. But a leaker had provided them with the untampered version, which shows tobacco industry talking points like comparing nicotine to caffeine and removing tax on heated tobacco products. Costello had given a reason for her redactions and said it was because it protects the confidentiality of advice tendered by ministers, which is a legal term for I just didn't want you guys to see it. And she's still claiming to not know exactly where that advice came from. Those rules about verifiable information, though, are clearly something that the minister was keen to use to hide damning evidence of connections to the tobacco industry in their talking points. At the other end of the day, though, we got a guilty verdict for a high-profile political figure on historic charges of sexual assault. This case has been a long time coming, and name suppression is still in place when I'm filming this, so we got to follow the rules, and our suppression laws are pretty airtight and mean that there's legally no way media, or anyone, can publicly name any of the individuals or anything that can directly reference anything that makes them identifiable in relation to the case until that suppression is lifted. And that is actually one of the reasons why name suppression was extended last year. With the election on, there was a risk of this case directly impacting the election outcomes. Well, that's what the defense lawyers successfully argued. And because of this, it limits what our media can say. They can give case details, but nothing that would name anyone and nothing that may influence the jury, which is why it was revealed that the leader of the party this individual is associated with was made aware of the allegations months before the individual resigned from the party. Now, to be fair here, those allegations were made through an online contact form on the party Facebook page with no way to corroborate at the time. So the party didn't take any known actions. But knowing that during the election, a story would come out of pre-existing knowledge of the allegations is a pretty motivating factor for a party to ensure name suppression was kept in place. Because most people only read the headlines before making a decision. It's actually called the science post effect. So yesterday, we saw two examples of political power and influence and how it can manipulate media in different ways, which has to work within certain rules to control narratives. It's not new, it's not uncommon, but it is something to be aware of going forward with any news story that you come across. There are rules in place about how our media do their job, and trust me, this kind of thing has got to be frustrating for everybody. But ultimately, it's all designed to ensure that what is reported is verifiable. Hello there, kia ora. At the post-cabinet press conference this week, the Prime Minister and Simeon Brown announced they wanted to see the country move forward with renewable energy sources to counter the price gouging energy supply companies are doing at times of low supply. After the PM tried to downplay comments from the United Nations Secretary General about the short-sightedness of restarting fossil fuel extraction by snapping at the media, he wasn't talking about us, la la la, I didn't hear a thing. But to do this, they're urgently bringing back fossil fuels through oil and gas exploration, and keep promising that the fast-track process that they've recently rejigged due to overwhelming public pressure is perfect for wind farms that are too scared to apply for consent. They even posted online about their determination to make us world leaders in renewable energy. And naturally, well, there's a lot of spin involved, and the lines between the claims and reality are vastly different. So let's start with the idea of bringing back oil and gas drilling. Both of these options are the opposite of environmentally friendly. Natural gas power plants are technically more efficient than coal plants, and they have less pollutant emissions, things like sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxides, and particulate matter that we get with coal. But the amount of methane it releases during the extraction, transportation, and distribution process is significant. And methane is a greenhouse gas which has a much higher global warming potential than CO2. In fact, methane is already the most common greenhouse gas emitted in the country. Oil is a highly pollutable fossil fuel which can't be processed here anyway. The oil produced in the past has had to be exported to be processed due to its viscosity, and no matter what Winnie and his merry band of cookers want to say, restarting the oil refinery won't fix that because it was never designed to process oil like that. It would require massive amounts of capital investment that this government simply doesn't want to do. The process of permitting, finding reserves, building infrastructure, starting production and processing, well, that takes between 8 and 16 years before you start to see any kind of financial results. And that depends on a huge range of factors. And that's only after they discover oil or gas deposits, which haven't occurred here since 2001. As a claim, this will help our energy resiliency. It simply wouldn't yield any results in less than a decade, maybe closer to 2, and no amount of spin is going to fix that. And when it comes to renewable power options, there are actually a few out there, and each has benefits and downfalls. Labour had started working on the Lake Onslow Resilience Project, which was cancelled by the current coalition almost a year before they announced fossil fuels as their answer to energy issues. This project was called a battery, but was essentially a backup hydro dam that could be switched on at times of high consumption to keep prices down and make sure the supply was constant. The environmental impact of this was relatively low, but like all hydro dams, would impact the local ecosystem slightly. Teviot Valley locals were never impressed with the option, but Teviot Valley locals also voted this as their local board member, so maybe what was required was more open communication on the topic. However, this project would also not have been ready for almost a decade, possibly more, but it would have helped with future energy resilience far better than fossil fuels restarting in a much more consistent manner. Then there's claims that Labour had made it impossible for wind farms to get consent, and the new fast-track bill's going to fix that. During COVID restrictions, there was a whole bunch of applications that came through that were then ratified by Labour afterwards in their fast-tracking process, which has more protections for the environment and better consultation with iwi, the National's new version. 15 wind farms were given consents that would see at least 1,551 turbines put in place, which is triple the current amount, and the current amount makes up about 12% of our power. So we're looking at a fairly significant increase. The setup time for a wind farm is between 6 and 18 months before it can begin production, which is significantly less than fossil fuels or hydro. The problem here, though, is the consents themselves. You see, they may not have actually been to build wind farms, but more to stop competition from building wind farms. The short turnaround time on the build, the relatively small investment in the infrastructure itself, well, it all means that our power companies, which are posting record profits, should be well enough resourced to start those works and have chosen not to. It's hard to see how that's going to change under the new government process. The government does have a 51% shareholding in most of these companies, so it does have the levers to change this. Instead, they want to bring back fossil fuels. Finally, there's solar as an option. Solar power currently makes about 2 to 3% of our overall power generated in this country, but falling costs and infrastructure, though, is seeing this kind of pick up. Incentives in Australia have seen solar power make up to 10 to 15% of their overall supply, with a focus on standalone projects and residential housing application. Both the Greens and Labour had policies in place last election to see incentives here put in place. The downsides, though, are limited battery capacity for individual solar storage, but that battery capacity is increasing, and the limited number of sunshine hours we get. Sydney, for example, gets about 500 more sunshine hours a year than Auckland. But solar is cheap to install and fast to get up and running, and on a localized basis can be quite effective. But the clear truth of the matter is that we need a range of responses to ensure energy resilience in the future. One option simply won't cut it. We can do something fast like solar, which will have a small impact on supply, or something really slow like a hydro dam, which means pressure on the system for a decade. We can force those with consents to prove that they're working towards using them, or incentivize the power companies to make sure that they pull through and actually set up wind farms. And these environmentally friendly options are either significantly cheaper, or faster, or more resilient in the long term than helping build energy resilience from oil, gas drilling, and whatever other fossil fuels they want to dig out of the ground. Hello there, kia ora. It takes a special kind of blinkered vision to believe that our major public sector entities, our police, our military, the education sector, or the health sector, run in strict compartments between the front and back ends of the organisations. But that's the fallacy that this government is determined to run to the public with and hope that the public don't ask questions or, think about it for a moment. Their claims of cutting backroom staff and not impacting frontline services is laughable at best. At worst, it sets up these organisations for failure. And when an organisation like Te Whatu Ora fails, it costs lives. But that's the call the coalition has made, to give tax cuts to landlords and the wealthy, and to give their pet projects cushy funding while underfunding core infrastructure. Which is why it's so depressing to see, again, another round of voluntary redundancy offers for Te Whatu Ora staff. In documents leaked this week sent to the admin staff within the organisation, voluntary redundancy rounds are happening again because, in their own words, people are their biggest expense. It continues the narrative that the government wants the public to believe that the issue isn't the fact that our health sector is underfunded, and it's not that they have no added pressure onto it already by reducing admin staff or underfunding primary healthcare providers or putting costs back on things like prescription medication, making it more difficult for many to take the preventative measures that stop our hospitals becoming overrun and put under extreme pressure. The sort of extreme pressure, actually, that see this sort of headline happen. Massive wait times in our emergency rooms in our largest hospitals in increasingly regular rates. Interestingly, those approached for this round of redundancies are asked not to be part of any unions, showing that unions actually offer a level of protection against these changes. They're also being told to support each other in this difficult time. But ultimately, it's a difficult time created by a government that increased funding lower than the rate of inflation. That seems to ignore the screeds of data that shows that primary healthcare is an essential element of looking after people and maintaining a healthy hospital system. That ignores the realities of an aging population. The fact is that none of our public entities can run efficiently if the admin support isn't there. And that doesn't matter if it's our hospitals or your local MP's office. Otherwise, you end up with all sorts of issues, like this flyer from my local MP. That was in my letterbox yesterday, where he claims the way to fix housing is to send kids to boot camps, making judges pass harsher sentences and focusing on gang activity. This is a mistake that admin would have helped avoid if he had more admin. Thankfully, this isn't a mistake, though, where people end up hurt or worse when the support isn't in place. No one in Aotearoa New Zealand should have to worry that their health is considered less important than tax cuts, that the dollar value on someone's life is going to be weighed against the dollar value of what landlords like our Prime Minister can make from investment properties. But that's exactly how it feels out there for so many New Zealanders right now. Hello there, kia ora. It's Friday, and again, it's been a really weird week. Like how yesterday David Seymour was crowing that Curia Polling, the only polling company that regularly puts ACT on 9%, brought out a poll that says the majority of New Zealanders support the Treaty Principles Bill. Despite saying just last week that there is no bill, so how could anyone have formed an opinion on it? Or that yesterday Hamilton City Council voted to retain its Māori ward with only one person voting against it, who happens to be a member of ACT. And somehow didn't see the irony of putting on social media this complaint about a small minority dictating things to the majority of people. You know, that party that always gets 9% on Curia polls. There was the fact that I had a tweet that I put out that was read in Parliament in the House in a debate. That feels really strange. Or that my local MP, the subject of that tweet, blocked the Waitangi Tribunal from presenting to the select committee he chairs, the Māori Affairs Committee, almost like he knows the tribunal isn't going to be a fan of his work. I actually had a chance to speak to former Speaker of the House, Adrian Rurafi, about this just yesterday, and you can watch that interview tonight on our live stream on YouTube and Facebook from 8 o'clock. Yep, latent self-promotion. There was the TVNZ putting out a Why You Can Trust Us document that explains how they do things, which upset a lot of people who seem to want to be angry all the time and still blame Jacinda for absolutely everything. So my newsletter today for paid subscribers explains what else mainstream media can do to rebuild audience trust. And I mean, it might not necessarily be a topic some people think I'm an expert on, but it is actually what I'm qualified in. But it's also free for everyone from Saturday, so you don't need to rush for that one. Oh, there was the climate change denial talk from the Deputy Prime Minister in Tonga, a members' bill from the Deputy Prime Minister to shut down Auckland Transport, and an announcement from the Deputy Prime Minister with red rags to the cookers about the expanded COVID inquiry. Why else would you put on Tanya, let's hang all the politicians, you can't call me anti trans just because I hate trans people, Unkovic, in the announcements? Oh, by the way, did you know that I can say Tanya Unkovic is clearly a conspiracy theory pushing spreader of disinformation and anti trans in these videos because of the rules around online media? But Ingrid Leary can't in the Select Committee in Parliament. So I'm going to ask her about that tonight as well because she's also on the show. Then there's the US election, which is in full swing at the moment, which, to be honest, I don't have a huge deal of information on. But I will, with the help of my friend and political science lover, Art, and his new YouTube show, which I'll be hosting on my channel, which will explore the US election each week, which he describes as his Super Bowl. If the Super Bowl was like the end of Gremlins 2 in the foyer of the building where they're all melting and being fried at the same time. There was the leaked documents that showed the government cutting funds to the disabled community, the leaked documents that showed the government making more health staff redundant, the leaked documents that proved Casey Costello put tobacco company talking points in cabinet papers, and that super awkward press conference with Ginny Anderson getting her police beat cop numbers wrong and then digging down on it. So I'm going to go and prep for tonight. There's Ingrid Leary, Michael Wood, Adrian Rurafi on the show from 8 o'clock. One of those people is actually the great grandson of a prophet. So it's going to be a fascinating conversation no matter how you look at it. So yeah, join me from 8 o'clock. Go check out the newsletter. And you might not hear from me for the next couple of days while I sit back and redo some lighting around here or, dust everything. So tune in tonight. I will catch you guys all there. Last weekend, United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres, seen here trying to teach Christopher Luxon how to do the twist after banning dancing in a small Midwestern mining town, stopped by in Auckland on his way to the Pacific Island Leaders Forum. When asked about this government's renewing of oil and gas exploration, which takes on average 16 years to see results, he said, "The only thing I can tell you is that oil and gas that will be discovered from now, I am absolutely sure it will never be used." He went on to say it would be as short-sighted as cancelling major infrastructure projects like new ferries to connect the islands or light rail from Auckland Airport or cancelling a dam in an energy crisis to pay for landlord tax cuts. Go to the next slide. Go to this slide. On Monday, over 900 homes were left without power in Petone after a helium balloon hit power lines. Energy Minister Simeon Brown is reportedly sad that he lost his balloon. Apparently, it was a gift from the Prime Minister for learning to be quiet when the grown-ups are talking in cabinet. Deputy Prime Minister Winston Peters, seen here eyeing up the buffet, took his opportunity at the Pacific Island Leaders Forum to double down on minimizing the impact of humans on climate change with the often used climate denier line of "the climate has been changing forever," at a forum where the focus is on the impact on the islands from man made climate change, where the guest list includes the head of the UN, who was there specifically because of the impacts of climate change on the islands. This week, councils all over the country have been voting on the retention of Māori wards. So far, all but two councils that have decided have chosen to retain the wards, with only Kaipara and Upper Hutt having voted to remove them at the next election, while 19, I think, so far have retained them. This sends a clear message to the current government that councils understand the needs of their communities better than central government. Maybe the results would have been different if the referendum didn't only target wards based on race, while the coalition tried to downplay saying it's not racist, or if the Prime Minister hadn't talked down to local body politicians at the LGNZ conference. But neither of those were going to happen under the current administration. A last minute addition to the controversial gang patch law was slipped into the bill after select committee hearings recently that will see gang insignia banned in people's homes. Paul Goldsmith, seen here showing the Prime Minister his new haircut to make him jealous, claims this bill strikes the right balance in keeping gang patches out of the public. Apparently, the public now includes people's houses, and it's not concerning in any way that the government feels it can dictate what people can wear in their own home. This week, Penny Simmons, seen here proving you don't have to be smart to be the minister in charge of tertiary education, was called out by the Te Pukenga chief executive for conflating the amount of debt the organisation is actually in by 5 times the actual amount. If she needs help with numbers, I know some amazing polytechs that might be able to help if they weren't being throttled by the government to pay for tax cuts. And finally, I promised good news. It's the annual Bird of the Year competition beginning next week on September the 2nd. Last year's competition was hijacked by foreign influences when US comedian John Oliver, seen here stealing the election, started a global campaign to have the Puteki Teki win the election. This year's competition sees the return of the controversial two-time winner, the Kakapo, the addition of the Adelaide penguin, and the exclusion of the past winner, the long-tailed bat. Personally, and I don't do this very often, I will be endorsing and voting for the kakaruia, or the black robin. I mean, look at the little dude. He clearly loves the All Blacks. He's a huge supporter of them. At one stage, there was just 5 of them left in the world, and the breeding program that actually raised its population from 5 to 250 created a new model that now is used to save birds all around the world. Understated, underdog, world leader, world changer. What better bird could represent Aotearoa on the world stage? And that's it. That's our news for the day. Hey, thanks again for watching this week's Omnibus. If you did, like I keep saying, each week, statistically, you might not have gotten to this point. Nobody's ever actually pointed out if they have or not in the comments section, so I'm just labouring under the impression that they haven't. Hey, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, tell everybody what's going on, and don't forget, if you're a member, you get to see advance copies of all the videos when they come out, so you get to see them when I upload them, not when they're released to the general public, which sometimes can be like a day in advance. So yeah, maybe give it a look, see if it works out for you. Until next week, hopefully this week is nowhere near as crazy, but, well, chances aren't very high that that's going to happen. Catch you next time.